Hey everyone, one last final video to wrap up the course. Sorry this is a little late. You may have gotten some emails yesterday about campus being closed. This is why you should not procrastinate things because you never know what's going to happen. Anyway, here we are, last video. First and foremost, probably why you're watching, a few words about your final course reflection. The syllabus and the instruction page, I think, has everything you need. I've tried to be very clear about what I'm looking for. Please let me know if you have questions, okay? Send me an email. I want you to feel comfortable that you're doing the right thing, okay? So if it's not clear what's happening, please let me know. There's really three components, as I tried to outline in the instructions page. One, describe what you learned, right? That's what a course final kind of does. Tell me what you learned, except there's no specific answer I'm looking for, right? There's no set list of things that you should enumerate here. You know what's in the class. You know what kinds of questions I've asked. I've told you in the overview videos over and over again, kind of the big themes that I'm hoping you can kind of connect, okay? While you're doing that, make sure you're giving specific examples from the readings. Don't just paraphrase the syllabus and say, I learned to do X, Y, and Z, the topics that are on the syllabus. Yeah, I know that you were supposed to do that, but did you really? That's what I want you to convince me of in your course overview. Be specific, please. Otherwise, it's hard to really know if you learned anything, okay? Number two, describe your learning experience, whatever this was or wasn't for you, okay? Obviously, there's no right answer to this because it's just your opinion of how the class went for you. These 4-week summer classes are weird. They're super fast. They're really intense. They're relentless. We never meet. It's super impersonal. It's really not what college should be like, but here we are getting the requirements done, whatever. So good. And this class has never been in a 4-week format before. It's been a regular semester class. And so obviously things get really shifted around and changed and compressed. And I'm very curious to know what your experience was like. What things worked for you? What things did not work for you? What topics did you like? What assignments did you think helped you learn, which were a waste of time? All these kinds of questions are on the assignment instructions. You don't have to go one by one, but please keep those general questions in mind. Just let me know how it went for you. One last caveat about this is sometimes people think, oh, this is a final. I can't say anything bad about the course. No, really, I tremendously value your feedback about the course. Obviously, you can do course evaluations, but those questions are very vague and it's hard to know exactly what to do with those answers. So please let me know specific to the stuff that we did and how we did it. So I would greatly appreciate any constructive criticism you have. Please be nice, but I know you will be. I really want to know what you thought, what worked well, what didn't. Okay. So suggestions for things to do differently, different topics that you wanted to cover that we didn't, topics that you thought were horribly boring. Please let me know. Right. I love this. I love the suggestions. So thanks in advance for that. Third, one last component to this assignment, which is kind of an optional one, because you don't have to do this, but sometimes your numeric scores don't reflect the work you put into the class. Okay. Your quizzes, sometimes the questions are not great. Sometimes the prompts aren't very good. Sometimes you're just really busy that day. Class moves really fast, right? So you just might be getting something done. So if your scores really don't reflect the work you've been putting in and what you've been getting out of the course, let me know. This is your chance to do it in this final course reflection. Okay. But again, just like the first point, you have to be specific, right? If you just say, oh, I've really worked hard, I should get a higher grade, that's not very convincing. Okay. So tell me specifically what you were getting out of the course that maybe didn't show up in your other work. As you go through these three different components, or two, maybe the third, please balance big picture analysis with specific details from the readings. I highly value creativity in your reflections. Okay, enough about the final. I just want to wrap up the course a little bit by connecting a few larger themes that we've been tracking over the last month. As a way of kind of tying everything together, I want to loop back to the student learning outcomes that are on the syllabus. I highlighted these the first video because they really underlie what the course is about. So I want to say a few words about them. I hope this kind of overview will help you in your course reflections. Okay, so the third one, so they're listed in order of importance in the syllabus, and I'm kind of going backwards. So we're counting down and then the course is over. Okay, so number three, critically evaluate modern dietary advice in broad historical context. Okay, you've done a ton of readings, right? Lots of different kinds of articles, academic, journalistic stuff. Some have been fun, some have been less fun. Lots of different kinds of publications, journals, magazines, book chapters, and so on. Lots of different kinds of authors, styles, primary sources, secondary sources. You've just gotten this, hopefully, this really broad cross section of how people have been talking about diet and health over a long period of time. Okay, so you've read all this stuff. So what's the value of this broad historical context that I hope you're getting from the course in general? And the answer, as I've alluded to before, is this historical distance and perspective. Okay, seeing something, diet and health advice, for instance, outside your own culture, outside our own world here, and our own sensibilities of what we value and we don't value. Hopefully, this helps you recognize some of our own implicit values and assumptions about diet and health that are really hard to see, if not completely impossible, when you're just immersed in our everyday worlds, right? So this historical perspective, looking at how Graham or Cheney or Galen or Lulu Hunt Peters or Atwater talked about calories and talked about properties of foods and so on. When you look at their system and their values, it kind of gives us a little bit more insight into how we can assess our own. It doesn't necessarily say what they are, right? We have to figure that out, but it gives us some questions to ask, right? Questions you've been asking all semester. What's the point of this text? How is the point being made? What is health for the author? What does that even mean? How do you measure it? Sort of what are the qualitative aspects of it? How is this person, how is the author trying to gain trust and establish expertise? What are the assumptions behind their approach to research, to health, to dietary advice, to expertise? What kind of evidence is being employed? What kind of alternative views are not being discussed in a particular text? So these questions you've asked of all kinds of sources throughout the last month. And I think when you ask those kinds of things about stuff you read every day, then you start to evaluate it a little bit differently. A lot of fad diets, say anti-gluten diets, represent anti-gluten diets, or even the all meat diet we just read about. It represents some kind of romantic vision of returning to this purer state of nature, right? This less complicated world where our diets were simpler and healthier and more natural for us. Everything's about natural diet, if you didn't figure that out. Reflecting the same kind of ideas that we saw in Graham, right? Different language. We talk about it differently now, but those same kind of sentiments of sort of purity and naturalness and romanticizing sort of previous diets, they're all there. So that's my final plea for why we should value historical perspective. And again, we've been doing it with diet and health sources, but it's true for everything. A broader historical perspective really allows us to evaluate everything in a different light. Number 2, counting down, I hope you're able to identify continuities and ruptures or discontinuities in how expertise and the rhetoric of diet and health has changed over time, right? Some things have remained remarkably constant, as we've seen. Personal anecdotes of success, right? Authors of dietary texts talking about they were sick, they changed their diet, they got healthy, now they want to share this insight with you. There's often a kind of rejection of mainstream medicine, or at least big components of it, and they have special insight that they want to give you. Tales of successes with patients. We saw this in Galen. We saw it with the meat diet. I mean, literally everything we've read has this idea of like, I've been helping people, it's worked, and to get testimonies and so on like that. There's also this appearance of going beyond common sense, right? One thing that we see in dietary advice all the time is that they try to make it seem clear and obvious, but it's also a little beyond what someone would come up with on their own, right? Which is why you need to trust this person and buy their book or buy their pills or whatever. A number of things have completely changed in terms of diet and health. Formal training in medicine, letters after people's names, regimented curriculum, this has all shifted dramatically. Kinds of evidence that we use to establish nutritional knowledge, right? Really different. Increasingly microscopic research. We're into gut biomes now and understanding this incredibly complicated landscape that's really hard to study because you can't just like cram stuff into people's bodies and be like, well, what's here? Thinking about larger structural issues is a new way of thinking about diet and health in some ways, right? The Barabee article on obesity reminds us other ways of understanding larger structural changes in our environment that might be affecting health. That's not microscopic research into chemicals, right? It's just this broader sort of lifestyle. So here we have a category of things that have changed. We have a category of things that have remained the same. And that juxtaposition is one of the lessons I hope you get out of the class, is that there's always a set of things that are kind of persisting in diet and health, and arguably with any kind of history. And there's always a set of things that are constantly in flux, right? So many times the ideas or the general precepts stay the same, but the details change over time. Sometimes we have categorically new things, right? The way we think about biochemistry as driving nutrition research, right? That would have made no sense to someone in the 18th century, right? But to us, it seems like the most important way of doing it. So there's this continuity and change all the time. I also want you to think about how science is used and the continuities and discontinuities and how that happens, right? For example, Cheney used the idea of invisible mechanisms governing the body, right? It was very mechanical because that was the ethos of the time, right? That was what scientists and natural philosophers were thinking about, how the whole world worked. Everything was governed by these sort of invisible mechanisms. They were invisible, right? That was very important because it gave the experts specialized knowledge. and they could theorize about how things fit together. So you could see the body as a kind of machine, a mechanical machine. You had to keep everything flowing. You had to, prevent blockages, right? Very mechanical and very invisible. Fast forward to the 19 teens, 1920s when we have vitamins. Same thing. Lots of, well, not totally, but same idea, right? Lots of invisible mechanisms that only experts, chemists like Atwater can tell you about, right? That's what his whole article is about, is how he's, as a chemist, getting special insight into the body, just like Cheney. The way they present their expertise is really, really similar, even though the details are completely different, right? And it does kind of issue a new way of thinking about nutritional research. But a lot of that idea of the invisible mechanism and expertise that comes from knowledge of it, that's the same. So again, my point here is that there's this layer of stuff that's the same, and this layer of stuff that's changing, and they're always kind of moving around together, right? And we have to understand kind of both. So you might be asking, well, so what? Okay, some things stay the same, some things change. I kind of knew that already. But I hope that when you see it in particular examples of diet and health, it gives you a different perspective of how you can use that to your advantage. But this idea of cultural expertise that we've seen develop in different ways over time and how that's established. The rhetoric of diet and health. Well, everything has a rhetoric to it, right? There's a way things happen in the contemporary world that's different from the past, right? But when you're thinking about the continuities and the changes, it helps you be a lot more effective. Okay. So for instance, totally unrelated to this class, let's say you want to sell solar panels for a living, which I think is great. More people should do that. Well, in order to do that, you're going to have to understand what connects with people, right? You're going to have to understand marketing and so on, and psychology maybe. But you're going to understand that there's ways of talking about this stuff that have always been successful, right? When you look back at the history of how people advertise and market stuff. And there's going to be stuff that's particular to us now and how we talk about things in 2025. So you have both these layers, right? And if you can understand how those work, you're going to be a lot more effective at whatever you're trying to do. Okay, number one, the most important thing I hope you get out of this class, to be able to describe how ideas of health have been historically constructed both culturally and scientifically. Let's take Graham again as a concrete example. People thought his scientific advice about diet was really good, not just because of scientific evidence, because it was kind of specious, but he had a lot of support for his arguments. Well, why was that? Because again, it reflected the society that people wanted to live in. It coincided with the virtues and the notion of a purer, more sort of natural society that people wanted to live in, right? The corruption of industrialization, modern life. Many people thought this is kind of a decline from a more virtuous life. And so his dietary advice reflected his cultural beliefs, right? But he grounded that in science, right, at the time. And we've seen this kind of go over and over, and you get language of quantification and you get other things like that. But you can see that the reason his dietary advice was so effective was because it aligned culturally and morally with what other people thought should be true. So, in a nutshell, dietary aspirations, as we've seen in this class, are also cultural aspirations. And this is just as true now, or mostly as true now, as it's always been, right? When people are giving dietary advice, it's not just about how to be healthier, because there's subjective determinants about what health is and why you should be healthy and what is health for one person versus another person. What are the priorities? One example we looked at recently, the values of thinness. Valuing a thin body in the early 20th century led to criticism of fat in food, all kinds of fat, even though the science was not really supportive of that idea. But culturally, that idea was so powerful. So we've seen this time and time and time again throughout the class. There's no objective knowledge waiting for our discovery, right? We decide what to measure, how to measure it, what the measurements mean. We interpret those. We interpret microscopic nutrition research and give broad dietary advice. A lot of social and cultural values go into that process. Now, that doesn't make it wrong or ineffective, okay? I want to be really clear. Science is great. To say there's no objective knowledge waiting to be discovered does not mean that science is fiction. It doesn't mean that we can't believe what we read about nutrition. We know lack of certain vitamins equals certain diseases. Like you don't eat vitamin C, you get scurvy. Like we know this. This is a fact, right? We can discover facts about the world. But again, there's this big gap between how we translate these sort of chemical interactions and bodily responses to dietary advice. We can measure how many calories are in a blueberry. We can research the chemical compounds in blueberries and understand how they interact with the body. Maybe they have antioxidants that clean up free radicals that, would otherwise encourage, corruption of cell reproduction, right? Blueberries lower your risk of certain diseases. But exactly how many blueberries should I eat? How many should you eat? Much harder to say. There's so many variables. And how we decide to offer that advice, right? And what the standards are, really difficult. Again, it's not to say science is wrong, but we have to understand what it can and what it can't do, right? Just as in the previous point, there's these two layers. We have to think about how we produce knowledge about the world. There's this objective scientific way that we do things, which is really great, but there's also this cultural layer, and they're inseparable. You can't just be perfectly objective as a human, no matter how much you try. And that's great. That's what makes us human. That's wonderful. We'll see what AI does. I don't know. Can it be objective? We'll see. It's based on what we do, so probably not. Okay, again, look, if you've learned anything about the history of diet and health in this class, great. Like, fantastic. But I hope, as I made clear in the opening video, history is a means to an end for this class. And my main hope is that you are simply more critical readers. So here's what I hope you can do. Very concrete, crude example. But somebody gives you a spreadsheet, for instance, right? You got data. That's what data means, given, literally, in the Latin root. So you get this thing and you get data, and somebody says, what should we make of this? Well, somebody who's just thinking very sort of microscopically is going to just look at the data and say, well, we can do this and this and this. But what I want you to be able to do after a class like this is to think about, well, why did we measure it that way? Why did we decide to keep track of these things? What else is not being represented here that may completely change what we want to do with it, right? So asking these meta questions about stuff. This is, I hope, how you can be more successful in whatever career you have, right? Every manager, every employer wants people who are going to ask good questions. I hope this class helps you ask better questions. I hope it makes you more informed citizens because you can understand how the rhetoric is working, even when there's a lot of science behind it. I hope it makes you more successful in life. Okay, maybe a little ambitious for a history course, but it's true. This is what higher education is, right? It's about this perspective so you can think broader and deeper about things than you would otherwise. Okay, that's it. Uh, Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your persistence. I'm really looking forward to your final reflections, learning what you learned, learning what can be better about the class, what worked well for you, and so on. Thank you for your attention. Stay in touch. Always ask why. Take care, everyone.